So continuing on with our series, today we're going to talk about an orchestral trap track. So this is basically a hybrid track. Some of you have heard the term hybrid. What is that? How do you do that? Well, hybrid basically just means that you combine two, maybe even three different styles of music, usually two, and you blend them into one cohesive new style of music. And what's really cool about this is that you essentially are increasing your licensability and your marketability to more clients by increasing, the different types of genres that you're including. However, this is not easy, and a lot of people do attempt at creating hybrid styles of production music, and it usually doesn't work out well because it's not easy. But what you can do is you can follow in the footsteps of somebody that's successfully already done it. And so that's what I hope you guys can get out of today's video. If you're an orchestral trailer producer, or maybe you're a trap producer and you're thinking about how do you carve a little bit more of a unique niche for yourself, or how do you create these hybrid sounds and styles, you'll get a lot of that out of today's video. So we're going to go through a cue here. This is actually on BMG Production Music website. You can go to bmgproductionmusic.com. You can get a lot of amazing high quality music to kind of get inspired by there if you want to. Again, not ripping them off, not taking chord progressions or leads, but using these as references that you can kind of follow in the footsteps of. This is a track called Creating a Legend off of the Orchestral Trap album. And Joseph Luana, I don't know if I got your last name right, sorry buddy, but you're the composer, and he did an amazing, amazing job with this as I was trying to find new tracks, and especially a hybrid track that I wanted to review in the series. This one just kept popping up in my mind as I was reviewing a lot of the recently released tracks. And so I just couldn't pass this one up. So we're definitely going to just go review it. So as with the previous reviews, I might start and stop things as we get through it. I do apologize. That might be annoying. But again, as we get through really important parts of the track, I want to highlight what's really working well about it and why you might want to follow in the footsteps and start to notice what is it about some of these tracks that have already been proven, they've already been accepted by some of the biggest production publishers and production companies out there, and likely have been getting tons and tons of placements. What is it that these tracks have that maybe yours don't quite have yet? And so how can you basically, as quickly as possible, get your production quality up to speed? This is what this is all about, and this is what I hope you guys are taking from this series. So let's get started. Let's just jump right into this intro section and just pay attention to, it's not a massive big intro, but how much tension this composer squeezes out of the first little section here that basically just gets this track started. Let's take a listen. So again, if you've got a pulse, you've got a heart rate, you felt something, especially in that last section of that just 4 on the floor kick fast, right? That 16th note kind of stuttery synth going on there, arpeggiated lead that was going on there, those big hits and impacts, the rising effects, that kind of real creaky door sound effect you put right here. What a just beautiful sound design element. It's not common. You don't hear that, this kind of stuttering, almost creaky door opening. It's tense. It's unnerving. It feels like something is about to happen. The floor is about to drop out from underneath us. So again, not a ton going on here, but just the right elements. And each one of these elements, whether it's the kick on the floor, whether it's the synth, whether it's the impacts or the sound design elements, they're all playing a very important and distinct role. There's no fat added to this intro. It's very slimmed down, it's very focused, and it only has what it really needs. And what's really cool about like an intro section right here is this is so clean with this nice edit point with a little bit of a break before we get into the rest of the track, that this could be literally cut out and used as a placement if need be. If there's like a trailer or promo or anything that would need a lot of kind of minimal tension to build up, this producer has supplied it for his clients just with this intro. So amazing, well played, and also you kind of already know exactly where this track is going to go already, just from this first couple of seconds of the track, right? It's a really important thing that I noticed with a lot of successful production cues is the intro, while it might not be the full release, here's what we're going to be doing in the track, it's definitely pointing all the arrows in the same direction, the very clear, focused, emotional direction, which is this is dark, this is tense, this is a little bit scary. So we know exactly what we're going to get out of this cue as we continue on with it. So if you're a supervisor or an editor or somebody looking or putting together a trailer, ad, and you're looking for that particular vibe, the first couple of seconds of this cue is going to give you that immediately. So that's a really good sign that this is going to do well. Let's continue on. So we've got our intro out of the way. This is setting the tone, setting the mood, kind of giving us a hint of where we're going. Let's get into the first sort of kind of meat and potatoes of the music. So we're just going to take this whole section right here before we move on. But obviously, you saw me bobbing along, nodding my head along, not even consciously deciding to do that. That just happens when you have really good music. Again, we always want to not get so lost in the weeds that we forget that music should be moving people. It should actually physically be moving your listeners. So this obviously is moving me, probably moving you as well. You saw in the beginning, really cool, simple kick, snare pattern with some strings, and then a cool stutter effect to end out that first progression, right? Then the bass comes in on the repeat, right? If we're going to repeat the section, basically copy and paste that first progression. We don't just copy and paste. They can do that. We never do that. We always add something, some new element. So he added the bass in here. And then notice also we have these sound design elements kind of creeping in about 3 seconds, 4 seconds before we go to this dun, 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 little bit of a breakdown section, right? So adding the right amount, not too much, not, whacking your listener over the head with these sound design elements and these transitional elements, but little risers and swells and just little, almost like slithering snakes kind of coming into the track and then boom, hitting a nice impactful downbeat when we go to the turnaround. So listen to, again, this transition. So you notice we were repeating again, right? So we had that whole first progression. It was just kind of these really low, strings, staccato strings, and a little bit of the kick accent basically. So, but very minimal. This is basically a minimal track at this point. It obviously is going to grow into something bigger, but you can tell and still feel all the tension with not a ton going on in the track. And this is why we have to constantly remind ourselves that sometimes, oftentimes, most times, less is more. Putting less into your track, but the right samples and the right progressions and the right writing, the right melodies or the right just riff essentially that you're writing in your track is what's going to deliver more of the value than just I got to throw another thing on here, because like an earlier version of me 15 years ago would have just started stacking way more on top of that, going that's just not enough stuff going on, I have to have way more. You really don't. A lot of times, especially if you're just trying to deliver clear, concise, emotional content with your music, do it with as few instruments and as few elements as you possibly can. But here we go, repeating it. Did he just copy and paste it over? No, we added a couple of things, some higher strings, and I think a percussive element as well. So kind of like a secondary false hit there, and then boom, into this kind of breakdown section. There was like a beeping, almost like alarm, sound, which is kind of cool. It's subtle. It wasn't, sometimes if you put these sort of out there sound effects into your cues, it can be distracting. That was so perfectly blended and kind of balanced in the mix that it was like, oh yeah, that's kind of like something's wrong, alarm, right? So again, staying consistently focused on where this track is going to go. And those new elements added to keep this interesting are like two things. It was basically this kind of I don't know, it was like an eighth note kind of new warped out percussion thing, maybe like an industrial percussion instrument he put in there, and basically maybe an octave higher string that kind of went on top of the main dun 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 main accent notes. So two things, and this is now moving forward and keeping our interest in moving in a great direction, and obviously developing and growing and not getting too repetitive. A very, very common thing that a lot of producers, especially newbies, kind of are guilty of in this business. So let's move on now to a little bit of the breakdown. We've had a little bit of a release of the music, and now we're going to go into kind of like a B section building up into the finale of the track. So right before we go into this last one, just remember, this sounds just like the intro, right? We had this kind of like arpeggiating synth lead in the beginning. More of like a stutter effect, but here, it's the same thing, but now we've got it released, so it's not stuttering, and we've got the drums. So it's just an alteration, it's a variation, it's an option that if somebody wants to use this version of it, they can. If they want to use the more stripped down version, they can as well. Edit point there. There's those alarm bell beeps as well. It's funny, those coming back in. But sounds just like what we were doing before, right? But it's bigger, right? This section right here has more elements, more production elements added to it. It was not just a copy and paste. So you remember the first one. Very stripped down, second time around. A little bit more of a drum beat now heading on with it, right? And then you have this high kind of siren lead going in throughout. New lead. Higher lead. And again, one more final edit point before we go to the finale here. But new leads going higher and higher, new elements being added on, chord progressions changing up a bit. Basically, we're kind of starting to release the track, right? So all of these other elements, as you can hear what they are, they're kind of sort of like subdued previews of what you're going to hear later on in the track. And one of the tricks that essentially you can use and pick up from this is some producers might want to just start, when you start composing a new track, start with like a section like this, like basically build up and start with the drums and the strings and if you got synths or you got horns or you got whatever you got going in there, put it all together, stack it up to you're like, this is a massive chorus. Then what you can do is start stripping things away to kind of build the previous sections of your track. So you basically take away everything except for the drums and the horns, let's say, and that becomes a part of your build-up section or a verse, et cetera, right? So that's one way that you can do this where you're not finding yourself struggling and figuring out like, okay, I built this whole track, now I have this big finale, what do I throw in there? Which can be a daunting task to figure out how do you build up a track to make it just really work. Well, sometimes you do that when you start a track. You just know when you begin it, this is the 10 level. Now I can kind of strip things away, mute things essentially, and build the rest of the track with a little bit more of a minimal approach on the other section. So one little tip you can use. And of course, we've got, edit points. We've got another edit point here. So this is definitely kind of composed like a trailer track. So it can be used for that. Not just for trailers though. This is a huge sound and a huge style for sports. I could definitely see this doing really, really well with sports. But let's see how he finishes up the track here. So an excellent finale to the track, having these great staccato strings, dun, 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 and then stacking up, bum, 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 the octave higher up, and having these great kind of bend downs with that horn sound effect at the beginning. Synth kind of, dirty sounding, bending down synth, really, really cool. The 4 on the floor, and then you have these kind of rhythmic drum hits hitting there. So this, again, itself could be placed multiple times. I could see this just by itself. The rest of the track, I'm like, it's not really working. But man, this last section, we could really use this for a promo or for a trailer or for a sports, whatever. So this is obviously a standalone section that could really do well. And of course, we finally, rise up to this final big impactful hit, which is a hit definite ending, something you guys always got to do with production music. And those kicks, if you notice, it was boom, so even the kicks are increasing in frequency and getting faster and faster. So all of it is rising up for this final huge finale. And as we usually see in a lot of these track breakdowns, it's the last section, which is the big finale of the track. It kind of is like one big crescendo. Obviously, you're kind of going up and down throughout it, but that's usually how your track structure needs to go. So hopefully this is insightful and helpful. I mean, if you kind of zoom out of all of this, essentially what you saw here was primarily the drums were really driving most of the trap influence and feel in this track, and the rest of it was orchestral trailer, okay? So a lot of times, it's not a lot of work to basically get hybrid styles to work together. And I can tell you, if you're going to do anything with trap or with hip-hop, you better have trap or hip-hop drums somewhere in your track, or a vast majority of your track should be reflective of that style with the drums, because that's really, if you think about hip-hop or trap, 90% of the genre is the beat. It's the drums. It's the actual rhythm of it. And usually when you hear hip hop or trap kicks and snares or hi-hats, it gives you this sense of, this is kind of a modern, hip hop or trap sound, essentially. So that's what I would highly recommend you always kind of focus on. Kind of the same thing would go if you're going to do like an EDM orchestral, which we might get into that with a series as well. What's the whole deal with EDM? Well, it's usually 4 on the floor. It's the kick, right? It's the drums. It's the swelling. It's side chaining. It might be some glitching, synth and that kind of thing. And obviously with some of these elements he had here where he was glitching and having some stutter effects before he repeated his sections, that's also a really cool way to kind of show some flair with your hybrid approach as well. So hopefully this track breakdown was useful for those of you that are interested in this style. And again, as I always ask, what do you want me to do next? I'm basically just watching these comments come in, and when I get suggestions like this very one, which was asking for kind of an orchestral trap one, I will listen and I will definitely put out videos on it. So it's up to you to let me know what is it that would be useful for you next. What genre do you produce? What style of music do you want me to kind of go into and let you know what I feel is really, really working for production music?